Pilots who miraculously survived after ejecting from the plane. Underwater. Taking off from aircraft carriers has never been normal, and there have been many accidents in this regard. However, ejector seats have also saved many of these pilots, including some whose aircraft had already been submerged. This is on October 13, 1954. Royal Navy aviator Bruce McFarlane took off from the British aircraft carrier Albion somewhere in the Mediterranean. A few moments later, his plane had fallen into the water in front of the ship. McFarlane was flying a heavy and powerful aircraft named the Westland Warren. It is said to be an attack fighter aircraft powered by a very large engine and two rotating propellers at the front of the aircraft, each rotating in a different direction. The Warren had difficulties in production and was entered into service only a year earlier. The Albion cruise that began in September highlighted a serious problem. It was said that the Warren could be subjected to G-forces on takeoff, which meant that the fuel supply to the engine could be momentarily cut off, leading to a flame-out problem. Without fuel or weapons, the aircraft weighed more than 7 tons and could not glide naturally. During its first deployment, several Warrens crashed into the sea after takeoff. McFarlane's accident, however, was somewhat different. Despite being powered by propellers, the Wyvern was a type of jet and was one of the few non-jets to feature an ejection seat, a requirement for pilots flying their aircraft. Immediately after taking off from a ship, they fall into the water. McFarlane did not have time to activate his seat before his plane plunged into the water, and shortly after, a 24,000-ton aircraft carrier passed over the submerged plane. The ship passing over it cut the sunken Warren in two. They waited during the agonizing moment of the plane's passage so that they could then detach the canopy. Then he pulled the handle. But nothing happened. McFarlane pulled the handle again, and this time the seat moved and jumped out. According to a report on the incident in the aviation website Hushcut, the pilot then found himself floating around in the water beneath the Albion. As if that was not enough, they soon realized that they were being pulled downwards in the water. It further reads that somehow they freed themselves from the entanglement of the net. That was their parachute, after which they began to slowly rise towards the surface. McFarlane used his seat in a way the designers had never imagined, and became the first pilot to successfully exit an underwater aircraft. Ejector seat technology was in its infancy at the time, and only a few dozen successful ejections had been made so far. Martin Baker, a British company that designed the seat, had not even considered whether the seats could work in this condition. "You shouldn't eject underwater," says Hushcut editor Joe Coles. Pilots who get out of their seats underwater face a number of challenges, including the risk of sudden submersion, and the possibility of decompression injuries if they rise too quickly to the surface. There is also a risk of stress in the body. Early carrier jets in the 1950s were using really terrible engines and often crashed after takeoff because of insufficient power, says Coles. The high accident rate of many of these types of aircraft encouraged the development of better ejection seats to save the lives of pilots. Martin Baker eventually built a version of his Mark VI set specifically for the carrier-based Blackburn Buccaneers. Cole says the idea behind it was that you need compressed air to operate. You don't need underwater explosives. So, with the Mark VI, you inflate the canopy with compressed air, and you push the pilot up with compressed air. When the plane reaches a certain depth underwater, it knows that it is there and starts the process of getting out of the water from there. The plane knows, and it has to get this guy out. We don't want to be underwater. A decade after McFarlane's escape, U.S. Navy aviators successfully ejected from an A-7 fighter jet that landed incorrectly during a night exercise and clung to the edge of the ship's deck. and the hook of his tail was caught in the wire. Pilot Russ Pearson later wrote in the Naval magazine The Hook, "In less than a heartbeat, the plane was stuck precariously on the edge of the flight deck. Ejecting at that time was tantamount to suicide. The ejection seat's rocket motor will propel the seat across the water like a spot rock bouncing off a pond." The A-7's engine was rolling down until it was moving too slowly to maintain its electrical power. Pearson writes that the plane dropped from the flight deck and went down some 60 feet 18 meters before plunging into the waters of the Pacific Ocean. The sensation was like falling into a black hole. In U.S. Navy training, pilots were taught that the average plane sinks 10 feet 3 meters every second, and that they only have 10 seconds to escape before it's too late. Hudson pulled the handle, causing him to be blown into the deep water by the explosion, the force knocking the oxygen mask off his face. He became incapacitated and survived with the help of the flashing lights of landing.